we see this from time to time. We see these really powerful spiritual leaders with these large communities go completely psychotic after and become, in some cases, like in John of God's case, just evil, pure evil. How does that make you feel about the impact he had on you when you were working with him? So I'm trying to figure out how you go from this highly academic world of MBA and PhD and corporate studying or corporate studies to past lives and ancestors and trauma healing. And I'm trying to figure out where that link is, or did they overlap, or like what happened? What was the sparking point that caught your interest into doing this kind of spiritual work?
I would say, and I ask myself that question too, right? And I tell people this joke: if I were to met myself 15 years ago, that 15 years ago will see this person as crazy or nuts, because that's because at that time that wasn't in my realm. I think first of all, I started doing a lot more emotional healing work first, which impacted more my body healing. But as the more I started doing emotional healing work, I started connecting more to which I call my higher self now. So I started having different experiences, more intuitive experiences. I was starting to get more knowings. My ability to manifest things started becoming quicker. So, it started with all this little stuff first, right? Awareness of this, because, I've watched The Secret and all this stuff. So, I'm aware of that, but I started seeing things shifting in that realm, the spiritual side of things, energetics. And I would say 2013 was the most profound year in terms of my spiritual shift. Like, I started having little insights, little experiences. But 2013 was a big year. 2013, I went to an event by John of God. He is a healer from Brazil. I mean, he's into a lot of issues right now. Somehow a friend of the teacher that did breathwork said, he's coming to Toronto, go. I just trusted. I just went, have no idea what it's about. But I somehow, if I look at the thread of my life, after meeting him, I still remember my experience in the room. He does something called a spiritual surgery, right? So I remember being in that room with a group of people. I just felt someone was examining me, but there was no physical person. Like, there's no person, but you just kind of have this sense, right? And I followed his regime of recommendation. Like, he there for 40 days, I was supposed to drink the water he provided, no sex, no spicy food. Like, there was a regime of stuff. Somehow, following that thread, that's when I met Oprah. I started meeting some of my amazing teachers that I have today, spiritual teachers started showing up. I started having experiences with entities showing up. I thought I was making stories up, but then it's not, right? What else? I'm thinking I wanted to talk about energetic healing, but I think that's been going on just quicker. Yeah, I had a lot of messages, strong messages that started coming through from different divine beings, spiritual masters started showing up. But I can tell you at that time too, my mind was going, are you making this up? But then I'll give you a simple story, a very quick one. There is this Egyptian god called Thoth, right? He was brought to my awareness through something I was watching. So I started paying attention. Oh, I never heard of this guy. Who is he? So, and then what would happen is I would walk into the store, someone would present, someone actually started talking about him. Like, I would get all these things started coming up front, right? And then so I started learning more about who he is, what he's about. And then the more I learned more about him, I started getting dreams about some of the modalities that he teaches. That all this stuff started showing up in my life.
Okay, well, have you read about John of God lately?
Yes.
So you know what he's been accused of. Like, it's really heavy for the listeners. It's really heavy stuff. It's definitely outside the scope of this episode. But that brings up the question for me is we see this from time to time. We see these really powerful spiritual leaders with these large communities go completely psychotic after and become, in some cases, like in John of God's case, just evil, pure evil. How does that make you feel about the impact he had on you when you were working with him?
I think when I first heard of it, I had doubts too, right? I'm like, oh no, did that happen? Did I made it all up? But I think I do believe it's not an either or. I think, sometimes, like right now, I know that I'm grateful that I have a connection with divine. I hear divine's guidance. I've constantly been getting assurance, and I've seen the evidence of the assurance or the messages that come through. So I do believe that he had that connection. But one of the things that my teacher said, Jyoti, which is my spiritual teacher, is, at the end of the day, we've got to be really clear, right? Because sometimes our ego does get in the way. And so his ego caught up with him. So I don't think it's either or. It's just really mindful. Like for me, I'm grateful that I have my teacher that I meet every once, twice a month. She's my check and balance. Like she's someone I go to, if I will ask her, where am I coming from? Where do you think this is happening? Like, or sometimes I do come from my ego, and I've got to just be mindful, or so I surround myself with people that gives me check and balance. And my teacher reminds me all of that. That's why it's important to put people around you that can call you on it when that happens. It's like, hey, you know what? This has gone beyond. Like you're now really, it's all about you now. It's no longer being of service, right? So I have at least 3 people around me that kind of, I've given them full permission to kick my ass, if it's okay to say. Yeah, whenever I do that.
It's basically like your personal mastermind or support group that, you each have full permission to call each other's shit out, regardless of what is coming up, and call it out how it is.
Yes.
It's powerful. It's really powerful. I've been a part of a mastermind group for going on 4 years now as well, and that's one of the things that was responsible for developing a very strong sense of integrity with ourselves, was the fact that we had a group, or there was a group of people to face or to call you forward when you weren't behaving or thinking in line with what they all know your best self to be, and not letting you get away with any of it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty fascinating. I think in these cases, what I'm getting is that these teachers like Osho is one, John of God would be one. They just stopped surrounding themselves with people that kept them humble or kept them out of the realm of ego, and then it just went completely out of control. And they started to get this superiority complex, and their ego developed, and they lost touch perhaps with their more divine nature. Is that accurate, do you think, in your view?
Yeah. So I can tell you this has been my biggest struggle. And what's interesting, I love that you brought this conversation, because it's been something I've been looking for the last whole year. One of my fear has been, I don't want to get into my head. Like, so then, if I get into my head, I've lost focus on my mission here, my purpose here. And I brought this up with my teacher for almost the whole year. I mean, besides other stuff that showed up in my life. And I love that one thing she pointed to me. She said that, but you notice that your fear is stopping you from fully embracing what's really coming. Because my fear is actually my ego too. So it's a very fascinating, time for me to take a step back and say, okay, the fear of that I might get into my head, too much, that's stopping me from actually embracing my full potential here too. Yeah. So now it's just, I think, being able to find that balance. And again, I think, like, you mentioned, having the right people surrounding them around us, it's a big key.
Well, I remember back, as you mentioned, that one of our core practices as a group in the first year was to identify the most uncomfortable or the scariest action to take, and then do that thing. And that was directly responsible for each of our rapid growth and development in that period. So it's a very powerful practice. Identify the fear and step into it, and have people around you to support you and push you to be your best self.